Hello, and welcome to this brief demonstration on Foglight security features. What I'm going to do is I'm going to log into Foglight Experience Viewer, and this is the main point. This is the central interface where we store all of the data, including sensitive data. So when you go through and you find data that you don't want to display or that you want to destroy, you first have to mark it. So let's go ahead and do a search, and I picked a specific hit in here I'm going to use for an example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for a request field, and for the request field, I want to look for any request field that has patient ID in it, and you'll see I have one here, and I can pick patient ID, and if I search it right now, I'm just going to search it over instead of the last hour. I'm going to do the last minute, so I get all the freshest data, and I'm going to search for any hit with patient ID in it. So I don't care what the value is, so I'll put a wildcard in there and search for that. Okay, now that I have patient ID, I can get the most recent one, so I'll just sort those by time. And then what I can do is I can look at the hit details for this. So I'll look at the hit details without going into the replay or anything, which I could also have done from here. And you'll notice the patient ID, I have a number right here. And that number is the number we want to mask. So I'm going to use that as my first example. So let's go ahead and create a filter for that so that we don't show patient ID in any of the hits anymore. So what I would do is I would come to Configure, hit Analysis, and there's two different sensitive data fields that we're going to look at. The first one is hit details. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new filter, add a sensitive hit detail, and I'm going to call this Hide Patient ID. Patient ID. And the description would just be to hide that. And this is going to be a request field, but it could also be a value in a cookie, a request header, or a response header, just so you know. But we're just going to use a request field as an example. For matching logic, we want to say anytime the hit detail equals, and then we can use the same query here to find our field. And we want to do patient ID, right? And we get the same value here because this is what we know we wanted to mask from our search. Now I want to take patient ID, and I want to, instead of the number, I want to put X's in there. So I'll just put 6 X's in there. And this is always going to be sensitive. So we're always going to mark it sensitive. If you click on these question marks here, it'll tell you what that field means, by the way. So we'll just use this as an example. And this says, should be considered sensitive, hidden, even to users who are members of the user groups with permissions to view sensitive data. So this data will be stored in the database unless a hit filter is defined with a storage restriction, which I'll show you, set to do not store hit details marked always sensitive. Okay, so we're going to see what that means a little bit, but just keep this in mind. We're marking it always sensitive. We're going to say OK, and now we have our filter defined for hide patient. Now what I could also do here, I'm just going to make an edit here, just so we can see this. Instead of these X's, I could also put an example of in here, hidden by Foglight. Okay, just so we know what that is. So let's just make that one change. And while we're waiting for that filter to take place, it could take up to 2 minutes for that filter to engage once I set it. I just want to go down here and make a note that as we made these changes, you can also go down to our configuration changelog. And I logged in as admin today, so you can see the user admin at 4:14. I made an update to the hit detail. I created it here, and also this is one before when I was doing an example where I deleted it. So any of these messages that go into our changelog, if you wanted to set this up for auditing, you could have these sent out to syslog, and the syslog can go to an auditor who would see anytime any admin made a change to any one of the sensitive hit detail fields. So this is yet another check to make sure that nobody makes changes to these hit details in order to see this data once they're configured. Now, going beyond this data, we can also go, and I'll show you some sensitive content expressions in a minute. But before we do that, let's go ahead and jump out and just see the effects of what happened when I search for hits now. And as I search for those, I'm just going to go make sure I have the freshest data like I did before, the last minute. And I want to search for, again, anything that has the request field in it that's called patient ID is the example that we use. Okay, and I'll pick that again, and I'll do my search, and again for the last minute, so we know we have the fresh data as compared to before. Patient ID, I missed the wildcard, so it has to be percentage in there. So anything with patient ID in it is basically what we're searching for. Do my sort by time, and then let's look at the hit details. So the hit details here should tell me that that's hidden by Foglight. So now the patient ID is masked. Now what I could also do here for this is I can go into the replay, and if we're replaying the user session, you'll also see in here that during the replay, this is the actual hit that it was on, that the patient ID is hidden in this replay as well. So if you go on to the details to look at some of the content, you'll see that patient ID is hidden by Foglight as well. So that's our quick demonstration of the one field. Now I'm just going to show you, all I did was I masked a request field, but I'm going to show you some of the other examples of things that you could mask if I go back into hit analysis. Okay, now as we mentioned before, we can do the same thing with any of the fields in the hit. So sensitive hit details, if I add a new sensitive hit detail, I could go request field. I could also do things in the response header or the cookie. So any of the fields that we have on any of the requests, whether request or response, you could mask them and apply the same functionality to it. There's also a different set of matching logic that you can apply to it. And now the next example I want to take you through briefly is one where we look at the sensitive content expressions instead. Now this one gets a little bit more tricky because what we're actually doing is we're going through the content and we're looking to trap things in there. So I'm going to show you one example I created here. And this is a really simple one. It goes through the content and it applies a regular expression and it looks for nine digits. Right? So if I go ahead and I want to test this to make sure my expression is working right, okay, I'm going to just put a bunch of text in here, random text, and then I'm going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I'm going to put a bunch more data in here, and I'm going to test this. Now what it says in my test is I matched 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 because there were 9 consecutive digits. Now what it says here is the sensitive group is group 0. So basically this is group 0, this is my match. Now what I could do in here is I can create different groups to where I would put dot star, so that basically matches everything in front of the 9 digits, and then I could make the 9 digits a separate group of its own. Okay. And what I'll do here is let's just do a quick test on this. And you'll see now I have group 0 as all of the matching text up through the 9 digits, and then it creates group 1, which is after the 9 digits. And then group 2 is actually the group that I have, and that is the 9 digits. So group 0 is always the default. It's going to be the whole string, and then we're going to go on to get some of the different groups based on my little grouping construct here. Now, one thing this is good for is looking for an anchor point, and this is usually what we have to do when we're searching hit content. So if I said SSN was my anchor point, I could look for SSN as the anchor point, and then what I could do is I could look for 9 digits after SSN. So let's say this was a field in the content, and on the line it had SSN, and it had a colon, and then the 9 digits. What I could do is I could say, go ahead and look for it this way. Now let's test this. And you can see group 0 is the whole group with SSN, group 1 is SSN, and group 2 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So now with my anchor, I can go up here and I could say apply, put this expression in, and just apply it to group 2. So my sensitive groups are group 2. That means I don't want to, even though I'm using the sensitive Social Security number as a search, I don't want to mask that. And that's what I'm being explicit about here in my definition. So in this case, I would use this expression, and I would say only get group 2 out of that expression. So the nice part about this too is that you can apply this to the response, or you can apply it to the request, or you can apply it to both. So no matter what text you have, we can search it and we can destroy it or mask it in this case. So let me show you a few other things besides the auditing and the masking of the content and the masking of the fields. I just want to show you the hit analysis piece. So once these are marked, I can go to hit analysis and I can define my new hit filters. And hit filters are basically what's grouping, they're the filtering that all of the hits go through. So I can create a hit filter, and I could do one where I do patient ID check. Okay, and what I could do here is I can add a condition, and I could choose from all of these different conditions. And now what I want to do is I want to look for a request field. So basically I'm looking for a hit where the request field, and then I'm going to do the same thing I did before, patient ID, patient ID is equal to, and then I'm just going to say %, just like I did before. Now what I do is I have a hit filter that will capture every hit that has patient ID in it. I could even add a condition, and I could say, because some of the times patient ID might show up in some gets, but I want to do is I want to do a request method. So I want to make sure that I'm only looking at posts. So this is an AND condition. And then what I can do here is I can have specific storage conditions. So you can see anytime I see one of these hits with a patient ID in it, and I can add a storage restriction. So I can say don't store the hit, destroy the whole hit, do not store the content, or I can say do not store the hit details. So this would include any of the details with all the parameters. Do not, if they're marked always sensitive, which we marked this one, do not store them. So this would actually delete it instead of putting it in the database and allowing people with sensitive security privileges to see that data. Okay, so this lets you destroy it, put it in the database, and access it specially, or you can go ahead and mask it with different values. So this concludes the presentation. Hopefully this and the documentation, which I'll show you very quickly. So if you go into the documentation and you look for the pages, and this is basically what I just ran you through in the video, but in the Foglight Experience Viewer user guide, you'll see there's this whole section on sensitive data. And that's basically sensitive response content expression is what we went through. There's also another section on sensitive hit details that we went through first. So now I'll end our presentation. Thank you very much for listening.